Opening in Ridgeview County, California, Cassandra Vale, 38, strode into court like she was attending a gala, not a murder trial. A decorated nurse with years of glowing reviews, she smiled at the cameras while facing nothing more than prescription violations, or so it seemed. For Cassandra, this wasn't justice. It was an act. She laughed at the charges, rolled her eyes at witnesses, mocked the judge beneath her breath. In her mind, the court had nothing. But behind the scenes, investigators had something she never imagined survived her cover-up. A single hospital security video. A recording that captured everything: the poison, the lie, and the moment a patient unknowingly signed their own death warrant. As her defense leaned on the illusion of medical accidents, the truth waited silently in a file labeled Exhibit 47. By the time the judge spoke her name for the last time, her confidence would be ashes, and her performance would be finished. The courtroom in Ridgeview County Superior Court was packed that Monday morning in late September. Reporters filled the back rows, their cameras aimed at the defense table where Cassandra Vale sat with her attorney, Marcus Whitfield, a veteran defense lawyer known for taking on difficult cases. The air conditioning hummed quietly, doing little to cut the tension that filled the wood-paneled room. Judge Patricia Thornton, a stern woman in her early 60s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, entered through the side door. Everyone rose. Judge Thornton took her seat and surveyed the courtroom with sharp eyes that had seen thousands of cases over her 20-year career. She nodded to the bailiff, a broad-shouldered man named Dennis Carver, who had worked this courtroom for a decade. The bailiff called the case: the people of the state of California versus Cassandra Marie Vale. The charges were read aloud: prescription fraud, reckless endangerment. And then the words that made several spectators gasp: 13 counts of first-degree murder. Cassandra stood when prompted, smoothing the front of her expensive navy blazer. Her dark hair was styled in perfect waves. Her makeup was flawless. She looked more like someone attending a business luncheon than a defendant facing life in prison. When Judge Thornton asked how she pleaded, Cassandra's voice was clear and confident. "Not guilty, Your Honor." She emphasized each word, then turned slightly toward the cameras in the back of the courtroom. Her lips curved into the slightest smile before she sat down. A reporter in the third row noticed her mouth something silently. "This is stupid." The lead prosecutor, Daniel Reyes, a focused man in his mid-40s with graying temples and reading glasses perched on his nose, stood to address the court. "Your Honor, the state intends to prove that the defendant, Cassandra Vale, systematically murdered more than a dozen patients under her care at Ridgeview Memorial Hospital over a 7-year period. The evidence will show a pattern of deliberate, calculated killing. We will demonstrate that these deaths were not accidents, not medical errors, but intentional acts of homicide." Marcus Whitfield rose to his feet immediately. "Your Honor, my client is a dedicated healthcare professional with an exemplary record. The prosecution's theory is based on circumstantial patterns and statistical anomalies. Cassandra Vale devoted her life to saving people, not harming them. The defense will show that these tragic deaths were the result of critical illnesses and a hospital system under strain, not the actions of a murderer. What we have here is a scapegoat, Your Honor. A hospital administration looking to deflect blame for systemic failures onto a single nurse." Cassandra nodded along with her attorney's words, her expression one of dignified suffering. She even dabbed at the corner of her eye with a tissue, though those close enough noticed her eyes remained completely dry. Judge Thornton set the trial schedule and reminded both parties to submit their witness lists and evidence catalogs. The arraignment concluded, And as Cassandra was escorted out, she paused to wave at the cameras, her smile serene and unbothered. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Cassandra stood on the courthouse steps with Marcus at her side, and she spoke directly into the microphones thrust toward her face. I have dedicated 17 years to nursing. I have held the hands of dying patients. I have comforted families in their darkest hours. These accusations are not just false, they are an insult to every healthcare worker who has ever fought to save a life. I will be vindicated. The truth will come out. She tilted her head slightly, her voice dropping to a tone of practiced empathy. I pray for the families who lost loved ones. I truly do. But their grief has been weaponized against an innocent person. Back in the prosecutor's office, Daniel Reyes sat with his team around a long conference table. Files were spread across every available surface. Crime scene photos, autopsy reports, hospital records. Detective Maria Morales, a veteran investigator with the Ridgeview County Sheriff's Department, pointed to a timeline she had constructed on the whiteboard. Every single death occurred during Cassandra Vale's shift. Every single one. No exceptions. 12 patients over 7 years, all dying under circumstances initially attributed to natural causes or complications from existing conditions. But when you look closer, the pattern is undeniable. Reyes leaned back in his chair, studying the timeline. The first death was in 2016. Elderly patient, diabetes, found dead after what appeared to be a hypoglycemic episode. Nothing seemed unusual at the time. Medical examiner ruled it natural causes. Detective Morales nodded. Because it looked exactly like what you would expect to see in a diabetic patient. But here's what we didn't know then. The patient's medical chart showed insulin, administration, but the dose recorded didn't match what should have been given based on the patient's blood sugar levels. Someone altered the records. A junior prosecutor named Amy Chen, fresh out of law school but already proving herself sharp and dedicated, pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop. I've been tracking the prescription discrepancies. Cassandra Vale had access to the medication room during every incident. And hospital auditors found irregularities in drug inventory that coincide with the dates of death. Insulin, morphine, potassium chloride. All substances that can kill if administered improperly, and all difficult to detect post-mortem if you're not specifically looking for them. Reyes knew they had a strong circumstantial case, but juries needed more than patterns and statistics. They needed something concrete, something undeniable. That's where Exhibit 47 would come in, but they were saving it, building the case methodically, letting the defense commit to their narrative before destroying it completely. The trial began in earnest 2 weeks later. The prosecution called their first witness, Dr. Helen Cartwright, Chief of Staff at Ridgeview Memorial Hospital. She was a dignified woman in her late 50s who walked to the stand with obvious reluctance. After being sworn in, she sat with her hands folded in her lap. Reyes approached the witness stand with a gentle demeanor. Dr. Cartwright, how long have you known the defendant? Cassandra Vale worked at Ridgeview Memorial for 17 years. I hired her myself in 2006. She came highly recommended from her nursing program. For many years, she was an exemplary employee. Dr. Cartwright's voice was steady but sad, as if each word pained her. Reyes asked about Cassandra's work performance, and the doctor confirmed glowing reviews, commendations, even a Nurse of the Year award in 2019. The jury listened carefully. Several made notes. But then Reyes shifted the questioning. Dr. Cartwright, when did you first become aware of irregularities in patient deaths on certain shifts? The doctor hesitated. In early 2023, our risk management department flagged an unusual mortality rate on the overnight shifts in the cardiac care unit. It was subtle, nothing that would immediately raise alarms, but statistically significant when analyzed over a multi-year period. We initiated an internal audit. And what did that audit reveal? Reyes asked, his tone sharpening. That all of the flagged deaths occurred when Cassandra Vale was the attending nurse. Dr. Cartwright's voice dropped almost to a whisper. At first, we thought it might be coincidence. Overnight shifts are inherently more dangerous for patients. Staffing is lighter. But when we dug deeper, we found documentation inconsistencies. Charts that had been accessed and modified after the fact. Medication logs that didn't match administration records. Cassandra sat at the defense table, her arms crossed, shaking her head slowly in a performance of disbelief. She leaned over to whisper something to Marcus, who nodded and made a note on his legal pad. Several jurors glanced at her. Her expression conveyed wounded innocence, as if she couldn't believe anyone would suggest such things. Marcus Whitfield rose for cross-examination. Dr. Cartwright, isn't it true that Ridgeview Memorial has been cited multiple times for understaffing? The doctor admitted it was. And isn't it true that the hospital faced budget cuts that resulted in reduced support staff during overnight hours? Again, she confirmed it. So these deaths could have resulted from systemic failures in hospital care rather than the actions of any single individual, correct? Dr. Cartwright paused before answering. That was our initial hope, Mr. Whitfield. But the evidence suggests otherwise. The defense attorney pressed further, but Dr. Cartwright remained firm. The testimony concluded, and the jury looked troubled. This wasn't the simple case of institutional scapegoating the defense had promised. Over the next 2 days, the prosecution called a parade of witnesses. Nurses who had worked alongside Cassandra described her as professional, competent, occasionally distant. One nurse, a young woman named Jennifer Paloma, who had worked the night shift with Cassandra for 3 years, provided testimony that shifted the atmosphere in the courtroom. Reyes asked her to describe Cassandra's behavior. She was very particular about patient assignments. She would sometimes request to switch patients with other nurses. At the time, I thought she was just being helpful, taking on the more difficult cases. Did you ever witness anything unusual about how she interacted with patients? Reyes asked. Jennifer hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. There was one night, about 2 years ago. I came back from my break early and saw Cassandra in a patient's room. The patient was an elderly man, sedated. She was standing by his intravenous line, and when she saw me, she seemed startled. She said she was just checking his fluids. But something about the way she moved, it felt off. I didn't think much of it at the time. What happened to that patient? Reyes asked quietly. He died later that night. Cardiac arrest. It was attributed to his existing heart condition. The courtroom went silent. Cassandra's expression didn't change, but those watching closely saw her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. The defense cross-examined, trying to paint Jennifer as speculative and unreliable. But the seed was planted. The jury was beginning to see past the polished exterior. As the trial entered its second week, the prosecution shifted to financial evidence. A forensic accountant named Robert Eng took the stand, presenting detailed records of Cassandra's finances. He explained that 2 of the victims had life insurance policies listing Cassandra as a beneficiary. Mr. Eng, how did the defendant become a beneficiary on these policies? Reyes asked. In both cases, the victims were elderly patients without close family. Cassandra Vale had befriended them during their hospital stays. She visited them at their homes, She helped them with errands. She positioned herself as a trusted companion. Both victims changed their policies to include her as a beneficiary within months of meeting her. And how much did she receive from these policies? Reyes asked. A total of $475,000. The jury reacted visibly. Gasps rippled through the spectators. Cassandra's face flushed slightly, but she maintained her composure. She leaned toward Marcus and whispered urgently. He nodded, making more notes. During cross-examination, Marcus argued that befriending patients was part of compassionate care, that there was nothing sinister about elderly people wanting to leave something to a nurse who had shown them kindness. But the financial motive was now established in the jury's mind. The pattern was becoming clearer. Access, opportunity, and now, motive. Detective Maria Morales took the stand on the 8th day of trial. She was a compact woman with sharp eyes and an air of quiet authority. Reyes walked her through the investigation step by step. Detective Morales, when did you first become involved in this case? In March 2023, when the hospital reported their internal audit findings to our department. We immediately launched a criminal investigation. Describe that process for the jury. Detective Morales turned slightly to face the jury box directly, her voice clear and professional. We began by reviewing every patient death at Ridgeview Memorial over a 7-year period. We cross-referenced those deaths with employee shift schedules. We interviewed hospital staff. We subpoenaed medical records and electronic access logs. What we discovered was a clear pattern. 13 patients had died under suspicious circumstances, all during shifts when Cassandra Vale was working, and all showing signs of possible medication-related deaths. We obtained warrants for Miss Vale's financial records, her personal communications, her home. We interviewed family members of the deceased. We worked with medical examiners to review autopsy findings. In several cases, we were able to exhume bodies for additional testing. The detective's voice remained steady, but the gravity of the investigation was evident. This was not a rushed job. This was meticulous, methodical police work. What did the exhumations reveal? Reyes asked. In 3 cases where bodies had been preserved well enough for toxicological analysis, we found evidence of substances that should not have been present. Insulin in a non-diabetic patient. Excessive morphine levels. Potassium concentrations consistent with injection rather than natural cellular breakdown. These findings corroborated our theory of intentional poisoning. Detective Morales described the arrest. We executed the warrant at Miss Vale's residence at 6 in the morning on April 12, 2023. She answered the door calmly, almost as if she had been expecting us. She was cooperative during the arrest process, almost eerily calm. She asked if she could finish her coffee first. The jury listened, riveted. The image of Cassandra sipping coffee while being arrested for serial murder was chilling. During cross-examination, Marcus attacked the investigation's methodology, suggesting confirmation bias and tunnel vision. But Detective Morales was unflappable. She had anticipated every question. She had documentation for every claim. When Marcus suggested the police had focused on Cassandra while ignoring other possible explanations, the detective calmly responded, "We investigated every lead, Mr. Whitfield. The evidence led us to your client because the evidence was overwhelming." The prosecution then called the medical examiner, Dr. Raymond Okafor, a precise man with decades of experience. He explained the challenges of detecting certain types of poisoning, especially when initial autopsies were performed without suspicion of foul play. Insulin, for example, breaks down rapidly after death. If you're not specifically looking for it within the first 24 hours, you can miss it entirely. Morphine can appear elevated due to natural decomposition processes, so you need careful analysis to distinguish between therapeutic levels, overdose, and post-mortem changes. Dr. Okafor walked the jury through each victim's autopsy findings. He used charts and diagrams. He explained medical terminology in accessible language. The picture he painted was clear. These deaths were not natural. They were not accidental. They were homicides. And in each case, the method suggested someone with medical knowledge and access to controlled substances. By the third week of trial, the circumstantial web was tightening. The prosecution had established pattern, access, opportunity, motive, and forensic evidence. But Marcus Whitfield was a skilled attorney, and he fought back hard during the defense case. He called expert witnesses who testified about the inherent risks of hospital care, the difficulty of distinguishing between medical complications and intentional harm, the possibility of errors in record-keeping. He painted Ridgeview Memorial as a chaotic, understaffed facility where deaths were tragically common. He called character witnesses who described Cassandra as compassionate and dedicated. A former patient, an elderly woman who had survived a stroke, testified tearfully about how kind Cassandra had been during her recovery. "She saved my life," the woman said. "She stayed past her shift to make sure I was comfortable. She called to check on me after I went home." The jury listened, some nodding sympathetically. But Cassandra herself was the defense's biggest liability. Throughout the trial, she couldn't resist performing. When witnesses testified against her, she shook her head with exaggerated disbelief. When evidence was presented, she laughed softly, as if the entire proceeding were absurd. During breaks, she chatted with reporters, always making sure to position herself where cameras could capture her best angle. Marcus repeatedly asked her to stop, to show more restraint. But she dismissed his concerns. "I'm not going to act guilty when I'm innocent," she told him during one recess, loud enough for nearby reporters to hear. The turning point came during the fourth week. The prosecution announced they had additional evidence to present. Reyes stood before the judge with a thick folder in his hands. "Your Honor, the state would like to introduce Exhibit 47. We have additional video evidence that is directly relevant to the charges." Marcus objected immediately. "Your Honor, this is the first we're hearing of video evidence. We were not provided this in discovery." Judge Thornton looked at Reyes over her reading glasses. "Counselor, explain." Reyes nodded. "Your Honor, this evidence was obtained during the ongoing investigation and was only recently processed and verified by our digital forensics team. We provided it to the defense 72 hours ago as soon as it was available. We request a brief continuance to allow the defense adequate time to review." Marcus conferred with Cassandra in urgent whispers. She looked annoyed rather than concerned, waving her hand dismissively. Judge Thornton granted a 3-day continuance. During that time, the defense team reviewed Exhibit 47, and Marcus Whitfield realized his case was about to collapse. He met with Cassandra in the attorney-client conference room at the jail. "You need to consider a plea deal," he told her bluntly. "This video is devastating." Cassandra's confidence didn't waver. She laughed. "Marcus, they have nothing. Whatever video they think they have, it can be explained. It's probably blurry, probably doesn't show anything conclusive. Trust me, I know what cameras were in that hospital. Most of them barely worked." Marcus stared at her, seeing clearly for the first time the narcissism that had allowed her to kill without remorse. "Ms. Vale, this video shows you injecting a patient with insulin. It shows you altering the medical chart. It's time-stamped minutes before the patient died. Your face is clearly visible. Your ID badge is visible. The vial label is visible. For just a moment, Cassandra's mask slipped. Her eyes widened. Then she recovered, shaking her head. That's impossible. The cameras in the medication room were offline. I checked. Marcus closed his eyes. You just admitted you checked the cameras before committing murder. She realized her mistake and backtracked quickly. No, everyone knew those cameras didn't work. It was common knowledge. But Marcus knew the truth now. His client was guilty. Undeniably, unquestionably guilty. And in 3 days, the jury would know it too. When court resumed, the atmosphere was electric. Word had leaked that the prosecution had explosive video evidence. The courtroom was even more packed than usual. Judge Thornton called the proceedings to order and nodded to Reyes. The prosecution calls Agent Thomas Webb from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Digital Forensics Unit. Agent Webb was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the careful demeanor of someone who spent his life analyzing data. He explained his credentials. 15 years with the Bureau, specializing in digital evidence authentication and video analysis. Reyes guided him through the technical process. Agent Webb, can you explain how you verified the authenticity of the video we're about to show? Certainly. The video was recovered from Ridgeview Memorial Hospital's security system. It's from a camera in the medication room on the 3rd floor, cardiac care unit. The timestamp is November 17, 2022, at 2:47 in the morning. We verified the video's authenticity through multiple methods. First, we examined the metadata embedded in the file. It shows the original creation date and time, and there are no signs of alteration or editing. Second, we analyzed the video frame by frame using specialized software that can detect digital manipulation. There is no evidence of tampering, deepfakes, or artificial intelligence-generated content. Can security footage be altered? Reyes asked. Yes, but such alterations leave traces. Digital fingerprints, if you will. Inconsistencies in compression artifacts, anomalies in the pixel patterns, breaks in the timeline. This video has none of those markers. It is authentic footage from the hospital security system, recorded in real time on the date and time indicated. The jury leaned forward. Several spectators held their breath. Cassandra sat very still at the defense table, her hands folded on the surface in front of her. Her face was composed, but a muscle in her jaw twitched. Reyes continued. Agent Webb, can you describe what this video shows? The agent nodded. The video shows a woman entering the medication room alone at 2:47 in the morning. She's wearing scrubs and a hospital identification badge. She retrieves a vial from the locked medication cabinet using an electronic access code. She draws the contents into a syringe. She then leaves the medication room and enters patient room 342. The camera angle doesn't show the interior of the room, but she is inside for approximately 4 minutes. When she exits, she returns to the medication room, disposes of the syringe in the sharps container, and then accesses a computer terminal. She opens an electronic medical chart and makes entries. The timestamp on her computer access shows she was modifying the patient's medication log. And the patient in room 342? Reyes asked. Died at 3:12 in the morning, 25 minutes after the injection. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death was hypoglycemic shock caused by insulin overdose. The patient was not diabetic and had no prescription for insulin. Can you identify the woman in the video? Reyes asked. Agent Webb nodded. Based on facial recognition analysis and comparison with hospital employment records, the woman in the video is the defendant, Cassandra Vale. Her hospital identification badge is also clearly visible in several frames, confirming her identity. Reyes turned to the judge. Your Honor, at this time the state would like to play Exhibit 47 for the jury. Judge Thornton nodded. The lights in the courtroom dimmed slightly. A large monitor was wheeled into position where the jury could see it clearly. The video began to play. The footage was black and white, but remarkably clear. The timestamp in the corner read, November 17th, 2022, 02.47:33. The medication room door opened, and Cassandra Vale walked in. Even in grainy security footage, she was recognizable. Her face was visible as she turned toward the camera. Her hospital badge hung from a lanyard around her neck, the photo and name clearly legible. She moved with purpose, confident and unhurried. She approached the medication cabinet and entered a code on the electronic lock. The cabinet opened. She scanned the shelves and selected a vial. The camera angle was good enough to show the label, insulin. She drew the liquid into a syringe with practiced efficiency. Then she left the medication room. The video cut to a hallway camera showing her entering room 342. The timestamp advanced. 4 minutes passed. Then she emerged, returned to the medication room, and disposed of the syringe. She moved to a computer terminal and logged in. The screen wasn't visible to the camera, but her fingers moved rapidly over the keyboard. She was in the system for 3 minutes. Then she logged out, looked around the empty medication room once more, and left. The video ended. The lights came back up. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Every eye turned to Cassandra. Her face had gone pale. Her hands, which had been folded calmly on the table, were now gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles were white. Reyes let the silence stretch for a long moment before speaking. Agent Webb, in your professional opinion, is there any possibility this video has been fabricated or altered? None whatsoever. The video is authentic. Then Reyes played his final card. Agent Webb, can you zoom in on the defendant's face at timestamp 2:48:15? The agent brought up a still frame from the video. It showed Cassandra's face in profile as she prepared the syringe. Even in the black and white security footage, her expression was visible. Calm, focused. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. This was someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Reyes thanked the witness and sat down. Marcus Whitfield approached for cross-examination, but there was nothing he could do. He asked technical questions about video compression and metadata, but Agent Webb's answers were unshakable. The video was real. It showed what it showed. There was no explaining it away. Marcus sat down after only 10 minutes. His shoulders slumped. The prosecution rested. The defense had no rebuttal. What could they say? Marcus requested a recess to consult with his client, and Judge Thornton granted it. In the conference room, Cassandra's facade finally cracked. That video shouldn't exist, she hissed at Marcus. I checked those cameras. They were offline. I made sure. So you admit it, Marcus said quietly. You killed that patient. You killed all of them. Cassandra's face twisted with rage and fear. You don't understand. They were old. They were dying anyway. I just helped them along. And some of them, they owed me. They promised me things. Do you know how much nurses make? Do you know what it's like to wipe up after ungrateful people day after day, year after year for poverty wages? Marcus stood up. I can't represent you anymore. I'll file a motion to withdraw, but it won't matter. That video just convicted you. Cassandra lunged across the table, grabbing his arm. You have to do something. You have to discredit it somehow. Tell them it's fake. Marcus pulled away. It's not fake, Miss Vale. And even if I could argue that, which I can't, I won't. You're a serial killer. You murdered vulnerable people who trusted you. I'm done. When they returned to court, Marcus filed his motion to withdraw, which Judge Thornton denied. You'll see this through, counselor. We're too close to verdict. Marcus nodded grimly. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the foreperson, a middle-aged man who worked as an accountant, stood to read the verdict. On count 1, murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On count 2, murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. The guilty verdicts continued through all 13 counts. Cassandra sat frozen, her face blank. When the final guilty verdict was read, she made a sound like a wounded animal. A sob escaped her throat. The performance was over. The mask had shattered completely. Judge Thornton set the sentencing hearing for 2 weeks later. During that time, victim impact statements were prepared. The courtroom on sentencing day was even more crowded than during the trial. Families of the victims filled the front rows. Cassandra was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hands shackled. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore no makeup. She looked small and ordinary. Judge Thornton allowed the victim impact statements to be read. The granddaughter of one victim, a woman named Sarah Chen, whose grandfather had died in 2019, approached the podium with shaking hands. My grandfather was the kindest man I ever knew, she began, her voice breaking. He raised me when my parents died. He taught me to ride a bike. He came to every school play, every graduation. When he went into the hospital for pneumonia, we thought he'd recover. He was strong. He was a fighter. Sarah paused, tears streaming down her face. The night he died, I called him. It was late, around 2 a.m. I couldn't sleep. I just wanted to hear his voice. He answered, and we talked for a few minutes. He sounded tired but okay. He told me he loved me. He told me he'd see me in the morning. That was the last thing he ever said to me. Less than an hour later, he was dead. The defendant, she was his nurse that night. She told us it was a complication from his pneumonia. We believed her. We trusted her. Sarah looked directly at Cassandra, who sat with her head bowed. You took him from me. You stole our last real conversation. You robbed him of the years he had left. He was 72 years old. He could have had another decade, maybe more. But you decided his life was worth less than whatever you gained from killing him. I will never forgive you. Never. She returned to her seat, sobbing. Her mother held her. Other family members read statements, each one a devastating account of loss and betrayal. Then Judge Thornton spoke. The courtroom went utterly silent. Cassandra Marie Vale, please stand. Cassandra rose on unsteady legs. The judge looked at her for a long moment before beginning to speak. And when she did, her voice carried the weight of absolute moral authority. Ms. Vale, in my 20 years on the bench, I have presided over countless cases, robberies, assaults, even other murders. But I have never encountered a defendant quite like you. What you did goes beyond ordinary criminality. It is a profound violation of the most sacred trust that exists in our society. Patients in a hospital are at their most vulnerable. They are sick, frightened, dependent on others for their very survival. And they must be able to trust that the people caring for them are acting in their best interests. You exploited that trust in the most monstrous way imaginable. You didn't rob banks or commit crimes of passion. You systematically hunted vulnerable human beings over 7 years. You selected your victims with care. You befriended them. You made them feel safe. and then you murdered them. The judge's voice grew harder. During this trial, I watched you. I watched you perform for the cameras. I watched you smirk and laugh and roll your eyes as if these proceedings were beneath you. I watched you treat this courtroom like it was a stage for your narcissistic delusions. But that video, Exhibit 47, that showed the world who you really are. Not the caring nurse you pretended to be. Not the victim of a hospital conspiracy you claimed to be in your interviews. The video showed a predator, a cold, calculating killer who checked to make sure the cameras were off, who injected an innocent person with poison, who then calmly falsified records to cover her tracks. And 25 minutes later, that patient was dead. Judge Thornton leaned forward slightly. You showed no remorse throughout this trial. Even now, as you stand before me in shackles, I see no genuine contrition in your eyes. Only anger that you were caught. Only bitterness that your performance failed. You are not a nurse, Ms. Vale. You never were. Nurses heal. Nurses comfort. Nurses save lives. You are a predator who wore a nurse's uniform as camouflage. The families who spoke today described their loved ones. Real people with real lives. A grandfather who raised his granddaughter. A mother who loved gardening. A veteran who survived war only to be murdered in a hospital bed. You saw them as nothing more than opportunities. Opportunities for money, for control, for whatever twisted satisfaction you derived from playing God. The law provides specific penalties for the crimes you have committed. 13 counts of first-degree murder. The jury found you guilty on every count. They saw through your act just as clearly as I did. And now, it falls to me to impose a sentence that reflects the magnitude of your crimes. Judge Thornton paused, letting her words sink in. This court sentences you to life in prison, without the possibility of parole on each count, to be served consecutively. That means you will spend the rest of your natural life behind bars. You will never walk free again. You will never see a sunrise except through prison bars. You will never attend a family gathering, never travel, never experience any of the freedoms you stole from your victims. But even that sentence, severe as it is, cannot restore what you have taken. It cannot bring back the 13 people you murdered. It cannot heal the families you have destroyed. It cannot undo the years of betrayal and deception. All it can do is ensure that you never have the opportunity to harm another vulnerable person. All it can do is provide some measure of justice for those you killed and some measure of protection for society. The judge's voice dropped slightly, becoming almost conversational. You used trust as a weapon, Ms. Vale. That is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of your crimes. People trusted you with their lives, and you betrayed that trust in the most final way possible. You have dishonored the entire nursing profession. You have caused immeasurable harm not just to your victims and their families, but to the countless dedicated healthcare workers who will now face suspicion because of your actions. I want to be clear about something. This sentence is not about vengeance. It is about justice. It is about protecting society from someone who has proven herself to be irredeemably dangerous. It is about affirming that certain acts are so heinous, so fundamentally evil, that they place you outside the bounds of civilized society. You crossed that line 13 times. 13 innocent people are dead because you decided their lives had no value. Judge Thornton straightened in her chair. Before I conclude, I want to address the families in this courtroom. Your loved ones mattered. Their lives had meaning. They were not forgotten. This conviction, this sentence, it cannot bring them back. But I hope it provides some measure of closure. I hope you can take comfort in knowing that justice has been served, that the person responsible has been held accountable, and that she will never be able to hurt anyone else." The judge turned back to Cassandra. "Ms. Vale, you will be remanded to the custody of the California Department of Corrections immediately. Your nursing license has been permanently revoked. You will be registered as a violent offender, and you will spend every remaining day of your life behind bars where you belong. This court is adjourned." The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Cassandra let out a wail, her legs buckling. The bailiffs moved quickly to support her as she collapsed. She was sobbing uncontrollably now, all pretense gone, the reality of her situation finally penetrating her narcissistic delusions. As the bailiffs led her away, she looked back at the courtroom one last time. Her face was streaked with tears and snot. Her mouth moved, forming words no one could hear over her crying. The families of the victims embraced each other. Some wept with relief. Others sat in stunned silence, processing the finality of the moment. Sarah Chen, the granddaughter who had spoken so powerfully, leaned against her mother and whispered, "He can rest now. We can rest now." Detective Morales stood in the back of the courtroom, watching as Cassandra was led through the side door toward the holding cells. The detective had worked hundreds of cases, but this one would stay with her. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it. The betrayal of trust on such a massive scale. Daniel Reyes gathered his files, exhausted but satisfied. His team had worked tirelessly to build an airtight case. They had pursued every lead, interviewed every witness, analyzed every piece of evidence. And in the end, justice had prevailed. But there was no celebration. Too many people were dead. Too many families had been shattered. The best they could do was ensure Cassandra Vale could never hurt anyone again. In the days following the sentencing, Ridgeview Memorial Hospital announced sweeping reforms. New oversight procedures for medication administration, enhanced security systems, mandatory psychological evaluations for all staff, anonymous reporting mechanisms for suspicious activity. It wouldn't bring back the victims, but perhaps it would prevent future tragedies. The hospital administrator gave a press conference, her voice heavy with regret. "We failed to protect our patients. We failed to see what was happening under our own roof. We will live with that failure forever. But we are committed to ensuring nothing like this ever happens again." The story made national headlines. News programs dissected the case, bringing in experts to discuss how someone could kill so many people over so many years without being caught. Psychologists analyzed Cassandra's narcissistic personality disorder. Healthcare professionals discussed warning signs and red flags. Families across the country looked at their loved ones in hospital beds and wondered if they could trust the nurses caring for them. Cassandra Vale was transported to the California Institution for Women in Corona. She was processed, photographed, fingerprinted, and assigned a prisoner number. Her cell was small and bare. No cameras, no audience, no performance. Just concrete walls and a narrow bed, and the reality of life without parole. In the first weeks, she raged. She screamed at guards. She insisted there had been a mistake. She demanded to speak to lawyers, to the warden, to anyone who would listen. But no one cared. She was just another inmate now. Her narcissism, which had sustained her through years of murder and deception, now turned inward, eating away at her as she faced the crushing reality of her situation. She would never walk on a beach again, never smell flowers in a garden, never feel rain on her face, never choose her own clothes or meals or schedule. Every aspect of her existence would be controlled by others. The woman who had wielded power over life and death now had no power at all. And she would live like that for decades, aging in a cage, forgotten by everyone except the families whose lives she had destroyed. The nursing license revocation was processed officially. Cassandra Vale's name was entered into national databases as a violent criminal. Any future employer searching her name would find the conviction immediately. Not that it mattered. She would never work again. She would never be free again. The California Board of Registered Nursing issued a statement condemning her actions and reaffirming their commitment to the highest standards of patient care. Sarah Chen, the granddaughter of one of Cassandra's victims, started a foundation in her grandfather's name. The Chen Patient Advocacy Foundation worked to improve hospital oversight and support families dealing with suspicious patient deaths. She channeled her grief into action, determined that some good would come from the tragedy. She gave speeches at nursing schools and medical conferences, telling her grandfather's story and urging healthcare workers to remain vigilant. Detective Morales was promoted to sergeant 6 months after the trial. Her work on the Cassandra Vale case had been exemplary, and the department recognized her dedication. But she never forgot the case. In quiet moments, she still thought about the victims, about how easily it could have continued if the hospital's risk management team hadn't noticed the statistical anomaly, about how many more people might have died if they had been even slightly less thorough in their investigation. Daniel Reyes tried another dozen cases after Cassandra Vale, but none affected him quite the same way. The breach of trust, the exploitation of the vulnerable, it represented something fundamentally evil. He kept a photo of the 13 victims on his office wall, a reminder of why the work mattered. Justice wasn't just about winning cases. It was about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Marcus Whitfield, the defense attorney, struggled after the trial. He had done his job, providing a vigorous defense as required by law. But knowing his client was guilty, truly and undeniably guilty, weighed on him. He took a leave of absence from his firm, spending time with his family and reconsidering his career choices. Eventually, he returned to work, but he was more selective about the cases he took. Some stains didn't wash off easily. Judge Thornton retired 2 years after the Cassandra Vale trial. She had served with distinction for over 2 decades, but the case had taken something from her. The depth of human evil she had witnessed, the performance and narcissism and complete lack of remorse, it haunted her. She spent her retirement volunteering with victim advocacy groups, using her experience and knowledge to help others navigate the criminal justice system. The victims' families tried to rebuild their lives. Some found solace in support groups. Others struggled with trust issues, particularly when dealing with medical professionals. A few pursued civil lawsuits against the hospital, which settled out of court for undisclosed amounts. No amount of money could replace their loved ones. But the settlements at least acknowledged the hospital's failure to protect vulnerable patients. Ridgeview Memorial Hospital's reputation took years to recover. Patient admissions dropped by 30% in the year following the trial. The hospital invested heavily in reforms, in marketing, in community outreach. Slowly, trust began to rebuild. But there were still people who refused to go there, who couldn't separate the institution from the monster who had worked within its walls. Cassandra Vale's family disowned her. Her parents issued a statement expressing shock and horror at her crimes. Her sister changed her last name. They wanted no association with her, no connection to the evil she had done. In prison, Cassandra received no visitors, no letters, no phone calls. The isolation was complete. The woman who had craved attention and admiration now had nothing but her own thoughts and the endless monotony of incarceration. Years passed. Cassandra aged behind bars. Her hair grayed, her skin lost its vitality. The woman who had once preened for cameras now looked like any other elderly inmate. She developed health problems, diabetes ironically, and had to rely on prison medical staff for care. The nurses who treated her knew exactly who she was. They provided care because it was their duty, but there was no warmth, no compassion, just clinical efficiency. She sometimes thought about the video, Exhibit 47, the piece of evidence that had destroyed her. She had been so certain the medication room cameras were offline. She had checked the system logs. But what she hadn't known was that the hospital had recently upgraded to a cloud-based backup system. The cameras in the medication room appeared offline in the local logs, but they were actually uploading footage directly to secure servers off-site. It was a security measure implemented after a drug theft incident the year before. She had been meticulous in her planning, but technology had outsmarted her. In her cell at night, she sometimes allowed herself to think about what might have been, if she had stopped after the first one, if she had been content with her salary, if she had found healthier outlets for her need for control and admiration. But those thoughts never lasted long. Deep down, beneath the layers of narcissism and self-justification, she knew the truth. She had enjoyed it. The power, the control, the secret knowledge that she held life and death in her hands. That enjoyment had been her downfall, just as surely as the security video. The case became a teaching tool in nursing schools across the country. Ethics professors used Cassandra Vale as an example of how professional boundaries and moral codes existed for crucial reasons. Criminal justice programs analyzed the investigation and prosecution. Psychology classes studied her narcissistic personality disorder and how it manifested in serial killing. Her name became shorthand for the ultimate betrayal of patient trust. But for all the analysis and discussion, the most important facts remained simple. 13 people were dead. 13 families were forever changed. And the woman responsible would spend the rest of her life in a cage. Her performance finished, her audience gone, her confidence reduced to ashes. Justice had been served. It was cold comfort to those who had lost loved ones. But it was something. It was the recognition that some acts were so monstrous, they demanded the harshest possible response. The courtroom in Ridgeview County, where Cassandra Vale had been tried and convicted, eventually heard other cases, other crimes, other defendants. Life moved on. But the memory of the case lingered in the walls, in the minds of those who had been there. The judge's condemnation, the video evidence, the victim's family members weeping, the sound of Cassandra's wail as she was led away. These things didn't fade. They remained as a testament to both human evil and the justice system's response to it. In the end, Cassandra Vale's legacy was one of betrayal, murder, and narcissistic delusion. She had thought herself untouchable, above consequences, smarter than everyone around her. But the evidence had been undeniable. The video had been irrefutable. And the justice system, for all its flaws and limitations, had worked exactly as it should. The performance was over. The mask had been ripped away. And the truth, terrible and complete, had won.